Stolen vote to shock raid. January 3, 2026. It's just after 2 a.m. in Caracas. The lights across Venezuela's capital suddenly go out. Helicopters cut through the night sky. Fighter jets roar overhead. More than 150 American aircraft converge on the city from across the Western Hemisphere. Elite U.S. Special Forces descend on a heavily guarded presidential compound. Their objective is simple and unthinkable at the same time. Capture the sitting president of a sovereign nation. By sunrise, Nicolas Maduro is no longer in power, no longer free, and no longer in Venezuela. He is in American custody aboard the amphibious assault ship USS Iwo Jima, on his way to face charges in a U.S. courtroom. The operation has a name: Operation Absolute Resolve. It is the most dramatic U.S. military action in Latin America since 1989. But this story does not begin with helicopters and commandos. It begins months earlier, with an election that millions of Venezuelans say was stolen, and with a regime that chose repression over compromise. To understand how Venezuela reached this moment, you have to understand the country's long collapse. Venezuela should be one of the richest nations on earth. It sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, even larger than Saudi Arabia's. It has fertile land, access to the sea, and a population that was once among the most educated in Latin America. In the 1950s, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But everything began to change in 1998, when a former army officer named Hugo Chavez won the presidency. Chavez promised a Bolivarian revolution. Using oil money, he expanded social programs and reduced poverty in the short term. But he also concentrated power, dismantled democratic checks and balances, nationalized hundreds of businesses, and turned the state oil company into a political machine run by loyalists instead of professionals. When Chavez died in 2013, his chosen successor, Nicolas Maduro, inherited a fragile system held together almost entirely by high oil prices. Then oil prices collapsed in 2014. The consequences were catastrophic. Venezuela's economy shrank by more than 70%. Hyperinflation reached unimaginable levels, peaking at around 130,000% in 2018. Hospitals ran out of basic medicine. Food shortages became widespread. Studies showed that most Venezuelans lost significant body weight simply from hunger. Over time, more than 7.7 million people fled the country, creating one of the largest migration crises in modern history. By 2024, Venezuela was not just struggling, it was barely functioning. In that year, Venezuelans were given what looked like a chance for change. Her name was Maria Corina Machado. As an engineer by training and a longtime opposition figure, she emerged as the clear face of resistance to Maduro's rule. In October 2023, she won the opposition primary with an overwhelming 93% of the vote. Her message was blunt and uncompromising. She called Maduro a criminal, blamed Chavismo for poverty and violence, and promised accountability. Her rallies drew massive crowds, even in poor neighborhoods once loyal to Chavez. The regime moved quickly to stop her. In early 2024, Venezuela's Supreme Court upheld a ban barring Machado from holding public office for 15 years, accusing her of involvement in corruption linked to the opposition's interim government years earlier. Too many inside and outside Venezuela, it was an obvious political maneuver. Machado responded by backing a substitute candidate, Edmundo González Urrutia, a quiet, soft-spoken former diplomat in his 70s. He lacked Machado's fire, but that was part of the strategy. He was seen as a unifying figure, acceptable to different factions of the opposition, and crucially, not yet disqualified by the courts. As Election Day approached on July 28, 2024, the momentum was undeniable. Poll after poll showed González with a massive lead, in some cases more than 20 points ahead of Maduro. Even longtime supporters of the ruling party privately admitted the government was in trouble. On Election Day, millions of Venezuelans waited in long lines under the sun to vote. The opposition, having learned from past defeats, deployed more than 100,000 volunteers to monitor polling stations. Venezuela's electronic voting system produces printed receipts, known as actas, from each machine. Opposition workers photographed these receipts and uploaded them to secure databases in real time. By the end of the day, they had collected results from roughly 80% of all voting machines. The numbers were staggering. According to these tallies, González had won around 67% of the vote. Maduro had lost badly. Then just after midnight, Venezuela's National Electoral Council announced the official results. Maduro, they said, had won with 51.2%. Gonzalez had received only 44.2%. There were no detailed breakdowns, no precinct-level data, and no explanation for the massive discrepancy. For the first time in years, the government refused to release the underlying vote totals. The international response was swift. The Carter Center, invited by the Venezuelan government itself to observe the election, said the process did not meet international standards and that it could not verify the announced result. A United Nations expert panel reviewed the opposition's published actas and found them credible. The European Union, multiple Latin American governments, and the United States rejected Maduro's claim of victory. On August 1st, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated publicly that Edmundo Gonzalez had won the most votes. Maria Corina Machado appeared before cameras holding stacks of printed vote tallies, saying simply, "We have the proof." Maduro refused to budge. He accused the opposition of treason, blamed foreign interference, and declared himself the winner. Then came the crackdown. Within a day of the announcement, protests erupted across Venezuela. Not hundreds, but more than 1,300 separate demonstrations appeared in cities, towns, and rural communities. This was not centrally organized. It was spontaneous anger. In some places, protesters tore down statues of Hugo Chavez, a powerful symbol that even former believers had lost faith in the revolution. Maduro ordered what he called Operation Tun Tun, door-to-door arrests. Security forces and pro-government armed groups, known as colectivos, swept through opposition neighborhoods at night, dragging people from their homes. At least 25 people were killed in the initial wave of violence, many shot by colectivos. By early September, more than 2,400 people had been detained. Human rights groups documented cases of torture, forced confessions, and denial of legal representation. Teenagers were arrested. Venezuela's political prisoner count climbed to nearly 1,800, the highest in its modern history. Edmundo Gonzalez went into hiding as an arrest warrant was issued against him on charges ranging from terrorism to conspiracy. In September, he sought refuge in the Spanish embassy and eventually fled to Madrid. He later said he was pressured into signing a letter recognizing Maduro's victory, a statement he described as coerced. Maria Corina Machado also disappeared from public view, communicating only through recorded messages. She later said her life was in danger. Meanwhile, thousands more Venezuelans fled the country, adding to an already massive diaspora. For months, it seemed the regime had survived yet again. Then the United States escalated. In November 2024, Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election and returned to office in January 2025. Venezuela quickly became a priority. During his first term, Trump had relied on sanctions and diplomacy. This time, the approach was different. By mid-2025, U.S. naval vessels began appearing near Venezuelan waters under the banner of counter-narcotics operations. In September, U.S. forces began striking boats alleged to be carrying drugs, resulting in dozens of deadly incidents. Washington called it law enforcement. Caracas called it murder. In December, the U.S. seized oil tankers carrying Venezuelan crude, cutting off a critical source of revenue. According to later reports, CIA teams had already been operating quietly inside Venezuela, tracking Maduro's movements and security routines. By late 2025, the military buildup was unmistakable. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford was positioned in the Caribbean. Advanced fighter jets were moved to bases in Puerto Rico. Regional allies quietly granted access to airfields. Intelligence agencies monitored Maduro around the clock using drones, intercepted communications, and satellite imagery. On January 2, 2026, Trump reportedly made a final call to Maduro, urging him to surrender. Maduro refused. Hours later, Trump authorized the operation. After 2 a.m., in Caracas, U.S. cyber units disrupted communications and power in parts of the capital. Airstrikes disabled Venezuela's air defenses. Helicopters carrying Delta Force operators swept in low over the sea and into the city. There was resistance, but it was brief. Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were taken into custody and flown out of the country. By dawn, the operation was over. No American service members were killed, though several were wounded. Venezuelan officials said around 80 people died, mostly presidential guards. Cuba later reported that dozens of its personnel stationed in Venezuela were also killed. Maduro was transferred from the USS Iwo Jima to U.S. custody and flown to New York. In federal court, he declared himself a prisoner of war. Prosecutors charged him with narco-terrorism and drug trafficking conspiracies. The world reacted with shock. The United Nations warned of a dangerous precedent and a violation of sovereignty. Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba condemned the action. Some U.S. allies expressed unease. Others, including leaders in parts of Latin America, welcomed Maduro's removal as long overdue justice. Inside Venezuela, celebrations and protests unfolded side by side. Today, the country is in political limbo. Power remains contested. Maria Corina Machado continues to push for international recognition of Edmundo Gonzalez, who remains in exile. Washington's long-term plans are unclear. What is clear is that Venezuela has crossed a historic threshold. From a disputed election to mass repression to foreign military intervention. The events between July 2024 and January 2026 have reshaped the country forever. Whether this marks the beginning of recovery or a new era of instability is a question only time can answer. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. Stay informed and stay engaged.